This is 2 hours of disturbing Family Guy lore. So sit back, grab a snack, and let's start our video with a deep dive into every character that Family Guy has permanently killed off. Family Guy has been on the air since 1999, 24 seasons, over 400 episodes, and across all of that time, Quahog has quietly built one of the biggest body counts in animated television history. But here's the thing that makes it interesting. Most deaths on this show don't actually count. Peter has fallen off cliffs, been hit by trucks, and literally exploded more times than anyone can keep track of. Stewie has died in simulations, dream sequences, and alternate timelines. Meg gets thrown into the vacuum of space just so the show can get a laugh, and she's back in the next scene like nothing happened. Family Guy treats death like a punchline, and honestly, that's part of what makes it funny. However, every once in a while, the show does something different. A character dies, and they actually stay dead. No reset button, no dream sequence, no time travel fix, no cutaway gag that undoes everything. Just gone, permanently written out of the show. And when you line up every single one of those permanent deaths in the order they happened, you start to see something really interesting about how this show operates underneath all the fart jokes and chicken fights. You start to see that Family Guy takes death way more seriously than it wants you to think. So I'm going to walk you through every single character that Family Guy has killed off for real. We're talking about the first recurring character to ever die on the show, the massive murder mystery that wiped out half the cast in one night, the death that broke the internet and almost broke the show itself, and the characters who died because the real people behind their voices left this world. Every death, every story, every behind-the-scenes reason it happened. And I need you to understand that every single fact in this video has been verified across multiple sources, because when you're talking about a show that's been running for a quarter century, you want to get the details right. Let's start at the beginning. And the beginning is a dinner party that went horribly wrong. Before Family Guy figured out how to do big dramatic character deaths, it had to learn how to do small, stupid, accidental ones. And the very first recurring character the show ever permanently killed was a guy named Mr. Weed. If you've been watching Family Guy from the early seasons, you probably remember him, but honestly, he's one of those characters that a lot of newer fans have completely forgotten about. Mr. Weed was Peter Griffin's boss at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory. This was before Peter worked at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, before Angela, before any of that. Back in the first few seasons, Peter's whole work life revolved around this toy factory, and Mr. Weed was the guy running the place. His full name was Jonathan Weed, and he was this uptight, somewhat prissy guy who was constantly frustrated with Peter's complete inability to do his job. The show strongly implied that Mr. Weed was gay, which was played mostly for subtle humour rather than anything mean-spirited, and despite the fact that Peter drove him absolutely crazy on a daily basis, there were moments where you could tell Mr. Weed had a certain fondness for the family. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't even a bad boss, really. He was just a normal guy trying to run a toy factory, while his worst employee kept turning every workday into a disaster. The death happened in Season 3, Episode 9. The episode is called Mr. Saturday Night, and it's one of those episodes where Peter gets one of his big dumb ideas that accidentally changes everything. Peter's job at the toy factory is on the line because, well, it's always on the line. He's terrible at it. So Peter comes up with what he thinks is a genius plan. He's going to invite Mr. Weed over to the Griffin house for dinner. The idea is that if Mr. Weed sees what a great family man Peter is, he'll give him a promotion instead of firing him. Classic Peter logic. Completely wrong, but somehow just charming enough that it almost works. And the thing is, the dinner actually goes well at first. Mr. Weed shows up at the Griffin house, and the family puts on their best behaviour. Lois cooks a nice meal. The kids are relatively civil. Mr. Weed is genuinely impressed by the warmth of the Griffin household, which is saying something because we all know how chaotic that house normally is. He's having a great time. He's loosening up. He's even talking about giving Peter that promotion. Everything is going according to plan for once in Peter's life. Then Brian starts choking on a dinner roll. Peter, being Peter, tries to help by squeezing Brian in some kind of improvised Heimlich maneuver. The bread roll shoots out of Brian's mouth, flies across the table, and lands directly in Mr. Weed's throat. And Mr. Weed starts choking, and nobody can save him. He dies right there at the Griffin dinner table, at what was supposed to be the dinner that saved Peter's career. Now, the aftermath of this death is where things get really interesting, because it's not played as this big dramatic moment. There's no funeral music. There's no tearful goodbye. It's Family Guy, so the show immediately pivots to Peter trying to figure out what to do with the body, which leads to this whole dark comedy sequence of Peter attempting to dispose of his dead boss like he's in a mob movie. It's funny and messed up, and exactly the kind of thing this show does best. But here's what people forget about Mr. Weed's death. It actually mattered to the show in a way that none of the joke deaths ever do. Because Mr. Weed dying meant the happy-go-lucky toy factory closed. And the factory closing meant Peter needed a new job. And that new job turned out to be at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, which is where Peter has worked for basically the entire rest of the series. The brewery is where we eventually meet Angela, Peter's boss, who would become a recurring character for over a decade. It's where most of Peter's work storylines happen. It's where the show built an entire secondary setting that has been part of Family Guy's DNA ever since. All of that happened because of a bread roll at a dinner party in season 3. And that's what makes Mr. Weed's death so significant, even though the death itself is kind of silly. It was the first time Family Guy proved it was willing to permanently change its own status quo. Before this, the show operated like most animated comedies. Everything reset at the end of every episode. Homer could blow up Springfield, and it would be fine next week. Bart could burn down the school, and it would be rebuilt by the next scene. That's how these shows work, but Mr. Weed dying meant that Family Guy was willing to actually commit to a change. The toy factory doesn't come back. Peter doesn't go back to his old job. The show moved forward, and it never looked back. That's a small thing when you think about it in isolation. One dead boss, one new job, one change to the background of the show, but it set a precedent that would matter enormously later on. It told the writers that they could kill characters and make those deaths stick. It told the audience that not everything on this show is a throwaway gag. Sometimes things actually change, sometimes people actually die, and sometimes a dinner roll is all it takes to redirect the entire future of a 24-year-old television show. Think about how random that is for a second. Seth MacFarlane and the writing staff could have just as easily had Mr. Weed survived the choking incident. They could have played it as a gag and moved on. Peter could have kept working at the toy factory for another 20 seasons, and nothing would have been different. But they chose to let Mr. Weed die. They chose to close the factory. They chose to push the show in a new direction. And by doing that, they created the blueprint for how Family Guy would handle death going forward. Not as a dramatic event that the show dwells on, but as a plot mechanism that forces the story to evolve. The really interesting thing is that if you go back and watch the Mr. Weed episodes now, knowing that he's the first character who dies and stays dead, they hit a little differently. You notice the small moments where he's actually kind of a decent person underneath the uptight exterior. You notice that he genuinely cared about whether Peter was doing okay, even when Peter was making his life a nightmare. And you realise that the show sacrificed a character who still had stories left to tell, which is the mark of a death that actually matters. If Mr. Weed had been completely played out as a character, killing him wouldn't have meant anything. But because there was still potential there, losing him actually cost the show something. That's the secret to why permanent deaths work on Family Guy. They have to cost the show something. They have to create an absence that changes how future episodes feel. Mr. Weed's death changed Peter's work life forever, and every death that comes after this one follows the same basic principle. The character has to matter enough that losing them leaves a hole in Quahog that can't be filled by just dropping in a replacement. Now Mr. Weed was Peter's boss. His death changed Peter's career. But the next deaths on our list are a lot more personal than that, because Family Guy decided that if it was going to kill characters permanently, it might as well start with Peter's own parents. Francis Griffin was Peter's stepfather, and he was one of the most unpleasant characters the show ever created. And I mean that as a compliment to the writing, because Francis was so consistently awful that he was actually hilarious. He was this devout, old-school Irish Catholic who treated everything Peter did as a personal insult to God. He called Lois a Protestant whore, basically, every time he opened his mouth. He smacked people with his Bible. He idolized the Pope. And he had this way of making every family gathering into a guilt trip about sin and damnation that made everyone in the Griffin house miserable the second he walked through the door. Francis was voiced by Charles Durning, who brought this perfect mix of grumpy old man energy and genuine menace to the character. When Francis showed up in an episode, you could feel the whole family tense up. Peter spent his entire life trying to get this man's approval, and never once getting it. Lois was treated like she was personally responsible for the fall of Western civilization. Even the kids knew to stay out of Francis's way when he came to visit. So how did Francis Griffin die? In the most perfectly stupid way possible. It happened in Season 5, Episode 10. The episode is called Peter's Two Dads, and it starts with Meg's 17th birthday party at the Griffin house. Peter, being Peter, decides to show up dressed as a clown because he thinks that's what you're supposed to do at birthday parties. He's wearing the full outfit, the wig, the big shoes, the nose, all of it, and for some reason, he also has a unicycle. Peter tries to ride the unicycle down the stairs. He loses control immediately, because of course he does, and he crashes directly into Francis, crushing his stepfather under the weight of his body and the unicycle. Francis Griffin, the man who survived decades of Peter's stupidity, is killed at a teenage girl's birthday party by a clown on a unicycle. That's how he goes out. And here's the really telling part: nobody is particularly upset about it. The family goes through the motions of grief, but you can see the relief on their faces. Lois and Brian literally excuse themselves from the room and go outside to cheer and jump for joy. They're celebrating. Peter's overbearing, judgmental, miserable stepfather is finally gone, and the family responds to that news the way you'd respond to finding out you don't have to go to the dentist. The show doesn't even stay focused on Francis's death for very long. The episode quickly pivots to a much bigger revelation. It turns out that Francis wasn't Peter's biological father at all. Peter's real dad is a town drunk in Ireland named Mickey McFinnigan, and the rest of the episode becomes this trip to Ireland where Peter tries to win his biological father's respect by naturally getting absolutely hammered at every bar in the country. Francis's death is treated as a plot device to unlock a new storyline rather than as a moment of genuine loss. But the show wasn't completely done with Francis. In Season 8, in an episode called Family Guy, Francis comes back as a ghost to threaten Peter with eternal damnation for considering converting to Judaism. Even in death, Francis can't stop judging people. He shows up to lecture his stepson from beyond the grave, which is so perfectly in character that it almost makes you miss the guy. Almost. He's still an awful person, but at least he's consistently awful. Francis Griffin's death tells you something about how Family Guy views family dynamics. The show spent 5 seasons building up Francis as this oppressive, joyless presence in Peter's life, and then killed him in the most undignified way possible and let the family celebrate. There's something darkly honest about that. Not every death in real life is a tragedy. Sometimes the people who die are the people who made everyone around them miserable, and the honest human reaction to that loss is relief rather than sadness. Family Guy was willing to portray that uncomfortable truth in a way that most shows wouldn't touch. Now, if Francis's death was played almost entirely for laughs, Peter's mother's death was the opposite. Thelma Griffin's death was one of the few times Family Guy actually tried to do genuine emotion and it mostly pulled it off. Thelma died in Season 12, Episode 12. The episode is called Mom's the Word, and it starts with Peter coming home to find out that his mother has died of a stroke. No dramatic build-up, no warning signs across multiple episodes. Just Peter walking in the door and being told his mum is gone. The show plays this straight, at least by Family Guy standards. Peter is clearly affected by the loss, and the family rallies around him in the way they do when something actually serious happens. At the funeral, the family goes through Thelma's belongings, and Peter meets one of his mother's friends, a woman named Evelyn, who is voiced by Lauren Bacall. Evelyn is this older woman from the retirement village where Thelma lived, and she and Peter start spending time together because they're both grieving the same person. It's actually kind of sweet at first. Evelyn provides Peter with comfort and companionship during a difficult time, and Peter appreciates having someone who knew his mother and can share memories of her. But because this is Family Guy, things get weird fast. Evelyn starts developing romantic feelings for Peter. She plants a kiss on him, which completely freaks Peter out. Lois tells him to go talk to Evelyn about it, and Evelyn claims it was just her medication acting up. But then they spend more time together and Evelyn's behaviour gets increasingly sexual, and Peter has to have this awkward conversation where he tells her they need to stop seeing each other. The episode ends with Peter visiting his mother's grave, where Evelyn meets him and explains that Peter was the first man to pay attention to her since her own husband died. They hug, and Peter accidentally snaps her back, killing her. He leaves her body with the cemetery groundskeeper and walks away. It's dark, it's absurd, and it's Family Guy doing what it does best, taking something genuinely sad and wrapping it in layers of comedy that shouldn't work but somehow do. But the really interesting subplot in this episode is what's happening with Stewie. While Peter is dealing with adult grief in his typically messy way, Stewie is learning about death for the first time. He finds out at the funeral that people die, and this concept absolutely terrifies him. He can't sleep. He becomes obsessed with the idea that one day he's going to stop existing, and he goes on this journey where Brian takes him to different religious institutions to see if any of them can offer comfort about what happens after you die. None of them satisfies Stewie. Every religion has a different answer, and none of the answers feel right to a genius baby who runs on logic and control. Things get even worse when Brian, who is supposed to be the reassuring presence in this situation, admits that he personally believes there's nothing after death. No heaven, no hell, no afterlife, just nothing. This sends Stewie into a full existential crisis. He starts trying to kill himself in increasingly absurd ways, including hanging, death by cop, and dropping a toaster in the bathtub, which just gives him superpowers instead of killing him. Brian eventually talks Stewie down by telling him he shouldn't be afraid of living right now. It's a surprisingly tender moment between the two characters, and it shows that even Family Guy can handle heavy philosophical territory when it wants to. The episode about Thelma's death isn't really about Thelma at all. It's about how different people process the reality that everyone dies. Peter handles it by getting distracted and accidentally killing someone else. Stewie handles it by spiraling into panic. Brian handles it by being honest about his own fears. And all three of those responses feel authentically human, even when they're being filtered through cartoon characters. What I find interesting about the way Family Guy handles Peter's parents is the contrast between the two deaths. Francis dies and the family throws a party. Thelma dies and the show actually gives Peter real emotions to work through. That difference tells you a lot about who these characters were to Peter and to the show. Francis represented oppression and judgment. Losing him was a liberation. Thelma represented unconditional love, even though she wasn't always great at showing it. Losing her was an actual wound that the show took time to acknowledge. The other thing worth noting is that both of these deaths are permanent. Francis never comes back in any meaningful way beyond that one ghost appearance. Thelma never comes back at all. In a show where characters die and resurrect constantly, where Peter himself has been killed in cutaway gags, more times than anyone can count. Choosing to make these two deaths permanent was a statement. It said that Family Guy recognizes the difference between joke deaths and real deaths, and that when the show commits to losing someone for real, it means something different than the usual cartoon violence. Peter's parents dying also raised the stakes for every character death that came after. If the show was willing to kill Peter's own family members and keep them dead, then nobody in Quahog was truly safe. That realization made the next death on our list hit even harder, because it wasn't just one character who died. It was an entire room full of them, in one single night, in what might be the best episode Family Guy has ever produced. Season 9 of Family Guy opened with a 2-part episode called And Then There Were Fewer, and it's basically the show's love letter to murder mystery stories. Seth MacFarlane has publicly called this one of the finest episodes the show has ever made, and honestly, it's hard to argue with him, because this episode doesn't just kill characters, it kills 3 recurring characters in one night, reveals that one of the show's most familiar faces has been hiding a dark side for years, and permanently changes the cast of Quahog in ways that are still being felt today. The setup is classic Agatha Christie stuff. James Woods invites basically every notable character in Quahog to his mansion for a fancy dinner party. Tom Tucker is there. Diane Simmons is there. Quagmire brought a date. Brian's ex-girlfriend Gillian shows up with her new husband, Derek Wilcox. Mort Goldman is there with his wife Muriel. Seamus, Dr. Hartman, Bruce, even Consuela. The whole gang, all dressed up and gathered in one place, which is exactly the kind of setup where you know something terrible is about to happen. And something terrible does happen. James Woods gets murdered, or at least everyone thinks he does. The body is found, the doors are locked, and suddenly all of these characters, who normally exist in separate storylines, are trapped together in a mansion with a killer. The show commits fully to the murder mystery format. There are clues hidden in plain sight, there are red herrings, there are private conversations in dark hallways where characters reveal secrets about each other. It feels like a completely different show, and that's what makes it so effective. The first real death comes when Muriel Goldman is found murdered. Muriel was Mort's wife and Neil's mother, and she'd been a recurring background character since the early seasons. She was one of those characters who existed more as a part of the world than as a distinct personality. You knew her face, you recognised her when she showed up in crowd scenes, but the show never gave her much to do on her own. She looked, as many fans have pointed out suspiciously, like both Mort and Neil at the same time, which is saying something because those two characters look very different from each other. Muriel was stabbed by the killer during the night, and her death is played as a genuine shock rather than a gag. The characters are horrified, there's real fear in the room, and the show keeps the mystery going by not immediately revealing who did it. You're left wondering which one of these familiar faces is secretly a murderer, and that uncertainty makes every scene tense in a way Family Guy episodes almost never are. The second death belongs to Derek Wilcox, and this one is both sad and kind of hilarious. Derek was Brian's ex-girlfriend Gillian's new husband, and the show spent his limited screen time establishing that Derek was basically perfect. He was described as the best man ever. He was smart, funny, had his life together, and by Brian's horrified reaction in the bathroom, was apparently very well endowed. Derek was everything Brian wasn't, which made it all the more painful for Brian to watch Gillian be happy with someone new. Derek dies when the killer follows him to a balcony where he's trying to get cell phone signal. His last words are genuinely funny in a dark way. He sees the killer and says, "Oh my God, it's you, the man or woman who's been killing everyone." Then he gets hit over the head with James Woods' Golden Globe Award and thrown from the balcony. It's the kind of death that only Family Guy could pull off, where the victim is so generically perfect that even his dying moment is kind of bland and oblivious. But the real payload of this episode is the third death, and the reveal of who's been doing the killing. It's Diane Simmons. Diane had been co-anchoring the Channel 5 news with Tom Tucker since the very beginning of the show. She was one of those characters you took completely for granted, like wallpaper that you see every day but never really think about. She delivered the news, she bickered with Tom, she existed in the background of countless episodes as part of the fabric of Quahog. Nobody ever thought to wonder what was going on inside Diane Simmons' head, because the show never gave you a reason to ask. Turns out, Diane had a very dark side. She was turning 40. She was being replaced at the news desk. Her ex-boyfriend, James Woods, had dumped her, and Tom Tucker, her co-anchor, had been the one pushing to get her fired. All of this rage and resentment that had been building for years, maybe for the entire run of the show, came out in one explosive night. Diane planned the entire thing. She wanted revenge on James Woods and Tom Tucker, and she was willing to kill anyone who got in her way. She murdered Muriel Goldman. She killed Derek Wilcox. She killed Quagmire's date Stephanie. She killed James Woods' date Priscilla. And she nearly killed Lois too, chasing her out to a cliff edge with a gun, ready to add another body to the count. But that's when Stewie showed up. Stewie sniped Diane with a rifle from a distance, and as she staggered from the shot, she fell off the cliff to her death. Stewie's line as he pulled the trigger is one of the most quoted in the show's history. He said, "If anyone's going to take that bitch down, it's going to be me." And just like that, Diane Simmons was gone. Permanently. No coming back. No ghost episode. No time travel resurrection. The woman who had been delivering Quahog's news since the very first season was dead. What makes this episode so effective is how the show uses the murder mystery format to recontextualize a character we all thought we knew. Diane Simmons was on screen for 9 seasons before this episode, and in all that time, she was just the news lady. She was part of the scenery, and then there were fewer reveals that all of those years of sitting next to Tom Tucker, delivering the news with a professional smile while being disrespected and overlooked, created something dangerous underneath the surface. Diane's villain turn retroactively changes how you watch every old news segment on the show. You realise she was bottling up rage the whole time, and nobody noticed because nobody was paying attention to her. That's actually a pretty sophisticated piece of character, writing for a show that's best known for a chicken fight gag. Seth MacFarlane wasn't just killing characters for shock value. He was using death as a storytelling tool to reveal hidden depths in a character who everyone assumed was shallow. Diane's death means something because her life, as it turned out, meant something too. She wasn't just furniture. She was a person with grievances and pain and a breaking point, and the show waited 9 seasons to show you that. The aftermath of "And Then There Were Fewer" permanently changed the landscape of Quahog. The news desk was different without Diane. Mort was a widower without Muriel. Brian's ex-girlfriend Gillian was a widow. 3 holes in the world that couldn't be filled by just dropping in new characters. And the show committed to those absences. When you watch later episodes and see Tom Tucker anchoring the news with a different co-anchor, you feel Diane's absence. When you see Mort being lonely and weird at the pharmacy, you remember that he used to have a wife. The deaths stuck, and the world felt smaller because of them. This episode also established something that became a pattern for the show going forward. When Family Guy wants to kill characters, it doesn't always do it quietly. Sometimes it makes an event out of it. Sometimes it turns death into a spectacle. And sometimes the spectacle is the point. Because death in Quahog isn't just about losing characters. It's about forcing the audience to see familiar faces in a completely new light. But before we get to the death that literally broke the internet, we need to talk about the characters that died quietly. The ones that most people don't even remember. Because some of the most interesting deaths on Family Guy aren't the dramatic ones. They're the ones where the show just kind of lets someone go. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying this. Let's start with Horace, because Horace is maybe the best example of a character you never thought about until he was gone. If you've watched Family Guy at all, you've been to the Drunken Clam. It's the bar where Peter, Joe, Cleveland and Quagmire hang out in basically every episode. It's as much a part of the show as the Griffin House or the Quahog Streets. And behind that bar, for years and years, was a guy named Horace. Horace was the bartender and owner of the Drunken Clam, and his defining characteristic was that he didn't really have defining characteristics. He was grouchy, he was impatient, he poured drinks and occasionally said something sarcastic. That was about it. The show never gave Horace a backstory. They never gave him a love interest or a family crisis or a big emotional episode. He was just there. The guy who served beer to Peter's friend group while they talked about whatever dumb thing was happening that week. Horace was voiced by John G. Brennan, the same actor who voices Mort Goldman, and despite the fact that Horace appeared in the background of probably hundreds of episodes, he remained one of the most underdeveloped recurring characters on the show. The Simpsons gave us Mo Shislak, this rich, complicated bartender with a sad backstory, an unrequited love, and a deep well of character development. Family Guy gave us Horace, who existed primarily to slide beers across the bar. So when Horace died, it was both a surprise and kind of not. He was killed in season 11, episode 19. The episode is called Save the Clam, and it involves a charity baseball game between the Drunken Clam regulars and Goldman's Pharmacy. The pharmacy team brings in Jerome as a ringer, and Jerome hits the ball so hard that it strikes Horace in the head and kills him instantly. One pitch, one swing, one dead bartender. The rest of the episode deals with Peter and the guys trying to keep the Drunken Clam open without its owner, which is a surprisingly emotional storyline for a character who the show barely developed. And that's what makes Horace's death interesting. You didn't realise how much he mattered to the fabric of Quahog until he was gone. The bar felt different without him. The scenes at the Clam had a different energy. Horace was never the focus of any scene, but he was always in the background, and losing that background presence created this subtle emptiness that you could feel even if you couldn't quite articulate why. That's actually a pretty sophisticated thing for an animated comedy to pull off, creating a character who matters through absence rather than presence. Horace's death taught the audience that some characters exist to hold space in a world, and when that space goes empty, the world shrinks a little bit. It's not a dramatic loss, it's not a tearjerker, it's just this quiet recognition that someone who was always there suddenly isn't, and things are slightly worse because of it. Now, Paddy Tanager is the opposite end of the spectrum. Paddy was killed because the writers genuinely hated him. Paddy was this angry Irish character whose entire personality was getting in people's faces and saying "big whoop, wanna fight about it?" after literally every sentence. He'd show up in random episodes, always working a different job, always being annoying in the exact same way. He spat when he talked. He was belligerent for no reason. And apparently, the writing staff at Family Guy found him just as irritating as most viewers did, because they killed him off in the most deliberately overkill way they could come up with. Paddy was voiced by Tom Kenny, who you probably know better as the voice of SpongeBob SquarePants. And Paddy died in Season 5, Episode 3, Hell Comes to Quahog, when Brian and Stewie were on a mission to blow up a Walmart-style superstore that was threatening to take over Quahog. They were driving a tank through the streets, and they ran Paddy over. Then they backed over him. Then they ran him over again, just to be absolutely sure. The scene plays like the writers were personally settling a grudge with a character they created and immediately regretted. Some characters die for dramatic reasons, some die for story purposes. Paddy died because the people writing the show couldn't stand him anymore, and they wanted the audience to know it. There's something honest about that, honestly. Not every character works. Not every recurring bit lands the way you hoped it would. And sometimes the cleanest solution is to just kill the character and move on, preferably with a tank. Then there's Vern and Johnny, the vaudeville duo who represent probably the most meta death in the show's history. Vern was this old-timey entertainer, and Johnny was his piano player. They'd show up periodically to do these corny vaudeville routines that felt like they were from a completely different era of comedy. The joke was supposed to be the contrast between their dated shtick and the modern world of Quahog, but apparently the gag wasn't landing with anyone. Vern and Johnny were killed in Season 5, Episode 4, Saving Private Brian. Stewie shot them both to death in the middle of one of their routines, and then Stewie turned directly to the camera and said, "Okay, they're dead, all right? We're not going to be seeing them again." That's the show literally breaking the fourth wall to tell you that this bit's over and these characters are never coming back. It's not subtle, it's not respectful, it's just the writers saying, we're done with this, but there's a genuinely dark footnote to Vern and Johnny's death. The show brought them back briefly as ghosts in Season 6. Vern appeared as a ghost and asked Johnny to play him off one more time, but the camera cut to Johnny playing the piano in hell, surrounded by fire and brimstone. Vern looked at the audience and explained, "You're probably wondering why he's in hell. Johnny likes little boys." And that was the last time either character ever appeared. Their final moment on the show was the revelation that one of them was a child predator. It's dark even by Family Guy standards, and it adds this uncomfortable layer to characters who were originally just meant to be corny background filler. What connects Horace, Paddy and Vern and Johnny is that none of their deaths were dramatically necessary. The show didn't need to kill any of them to advance a major storyline or create an emotional moment. They were killed for practical reasons. Horace died because the writers wanted to do a story about the drunken clam being in jeopardy. Paddy died because the writers wanted him gone. Vern and Johnny died because their recurring gag wasn't working and the show wanted to clear space for better material. And that's a completely valid reason to kill a character on a show like Family Guy. Not every death has to be a big event. Sometimes a show just needs to trim the fat and move on. The quiet deaths are housekeeping. They're the show looking at its roster of recurring characters and deciding which ones are earning their screen time and which ones are just taking up space. But here's what's interesting about the quiet deaths when you put them in context with the bigger deaths. They create a world where death feels random, which is actually more realistic than having every death be a dramatic event. In real life, some deaths are huge tragedies that change everything. Others are small losses that you barely notice until much later. By having both kinds of death, Family Guy creates a version of Quahog that feels lived in and unpredictable. You never know which characters are safe, because the show has proven that it'll kill anyone for any reason, whether it's to tell a compelling murder mystery or just to clear a character off the books. The quiet deaths also make the dramatic deaths feel more earned. When the show actually puts effort into killing a character in a meaningful way, the contrast with these casual deaths makes the emotional moments land harder. You appreciate the drama because you know the show doesn't have to do it. It chose to, and that choice matters. Now, everything we've talked about so far has been relatively small scale, one character at a time, killed for story reasons or practical reasons, with the audience taking it mostly in stride. But the next death on our list was different. It was the one time Family Guy killed a character so important, so central to the show, that it nearly tore the fan base apart. And then, 2 episodes later, they brought him back like nothing happened. We need to talk about Brian Griffin. On November 24th, 2013, Family Guy aired an episode called Life of Brian, Season 12, Episode 6. And in that episode, without any warning, without any dramatic build-up across previous episodes, without any kind of foreshadowing that something bad was coming, Brian Griffin was hit by a car and killed. It happened fast. Brian was out in the street and a car came out of nowhere and struck him. There was no dramatic slow motion. There was no last-minute save. The family rushed him to the vet, and despite their best efforts, Brian died on the table surrounded by his family. Stewie held his paw. Peter was crying. The whole thing was played completely straight, with no cutaway gags, no jokes, no comic relief. Just a family losing their dog in the most sudden, senseless way possible. And then the show just moved on. The Griffins held a funeral for Brian. They mourned him in what felt like real time. And then they went to a pet shelter and adopted a new dog named Vinny. This tough-talking Italian dog, voiced by Tony Sirico, who you might know as Paulie from The Sopranos. Vinny moved into the Griffin house. He slept in Brian's spot. He started building relationships with the family. The show was acting like Brian was gone forever, and this was the new normal. The internet absolutely lost its mind. Within hours of the episode airing, social media was on fire. Fans were furious, heartbroken, confused. They couldn't believe that Family Guy had actually killed Brian, a character who had been on the show since the very first episode, a character who was arguably the emotional core of the entire series. The dog who had conversations with Stewie, who had the complicated love life, who represented the show's connection to actual human feelings underneath all the crude humour. Online petitions demanding Brian's return collected over 100,000 signatures. People were sending the writers death threats. Entertainment news outlets were running stories about the death like it was a real cultural event. The whole thing became this massive conversation about what shows owe their audiences and whether killing a beloved character for shock value is good storytelling or just cruel. And here's the thing that made it even more intense. The show didn't immediately reassure anyone that Brian was coming back. They let people sit with it. For 2 whole episodes, Brian was dead and Vinny was the new family dog. The Griffins were adjusting to their new reality. Stewie was grieving. The empty dog bed was visible in certain scenes. Everything about the show was communicating that this was permanent, that Family Guy had made a creative decision and was sticking with it. 2 weeks later, the show aired Christmas Guy, Season 12, Episode 8. And in that episode, Stewie figures out how to use time travel to go back to the moment before Brian was hit by the car and save him. Brian lives. Vinny disappears from the timeline. Everything goes back to normal. The whole thing lasted exactly 3 episodes. The reaction to Brian's resurrection was almost as intense as the reaction to his death, but for completely different reasons. Some fans were relieved and happy that Brian was back. Others were angry that the show had put them through all that emotional turmoil just to undo it. There was this widespread feeling that the whole thing had been a publicity stunt, a calculated move to generate massive online buzz during Sweeps Week and then cash in on the goodwill of bringing the character back. And honestly, there's a pretty good argument that's exactly what it was. The timing was perfect for maximum attention. Brian died right before Thanksgiving, when everyone was watching TV with their families and talking about what they'd seen. The outrage built over the next 2 weeks, keeping Family Guy in the news cycle constantly. And then Brian came back right in time for the Christmas episode, giving the show a feel-good moment that generated even more coverage. From a pure publicity standpoint, it was a masterclass in using character death as a marketing tool. But there's another way to look at it that's more generous to the writers. Maybe the point of Brian's death wasn't the death itself. Maybe the point was showing the audience what Family Guy looks like without its heart. For those 2 episodes where Brian was dead, the show felt different. Vinny was fine as a character, but he couldn't replace what Brian brought to the dynamic. The conversations between Brian and Stewie, which are some of the best scenes the show has ever produced, were gone. The philosophical arguments, the emotional vulnerability, the odd couple chemistry between a pretentious dog and a genius baby. All of that disappeared when Brian died, and the show felt lesser without it. Maybe the writers wanted the audience to feel that absence. Maybe they wanted to prove that Brian isn't just another character on the show, that he's actually essential to what makes Family Guy work. And maybe bringing him back was the show saying, yeah, we know, we can't do this without him either. Whatever the real motivation was, Brian's death is the exception that proves the rule about character deaths on Family Guy. Every other character on this list stayed dead when they died. Brian came back because he's too important to lose. He's a main character, one of the original 6 members of the Griffin family, and the show literally cannot function without him. His death proved it, and his resurrection confirmed it. But the Brian episode did something else that's worth talking about, and it's the emotional quality of the death itself. For those few minutes where Brian was dying on the vet's table, Family Guy was operating at a level of genuine emotion that it rarely reaches. Stewie's grief was real, Peter's tears were real, the silence in the room, the absence of music, the stillness of the animation during Brian's final moments. All of it was designed to make you feel something authentic, and it worked. Even people who are angry about the death being undone will admit that the death scene itself was genuinely moving. That tells you something important about what this show's capable of when it drops the jokes and commits to a moment. Family Guy has always had the tools to make you cry. It just usually chooses to make you laugh instead. Brian's death was one of the few times the show picked the other option, and the fact that it hits so hard proves that the audience's connection to these characters is deeper than most people give it credit for. The Brian arc also raised some interesting questions about death in animated shows more broadly. Can you really kill a main character on an animated series? The Simpsons killed Maud Flanders and kept her dead, but Maud was a secondary character. South Park kills Kenny in almost every episode, but that's the joke. Brian's death tested whether an animated show could lose one of its core cast members and survive, and the answer, at least for Family Guy, was no. Not because the show couldn't physically continue without Brian, but because the audience wouldn't accept it. The fans rebelled so hard and so fast that the show had no choice but to reverse course. That's actually a really interesting dynamic when you think about it. The writers have complete control over who lives and who dies. They can kill anyone they want, but the audience has the power to reject that decision. And in Brian's case, they did. The 100,000 signatures on that petition weren't just fans being sad. They were fans telling the show, "You don't get to make this choice without us." And the show listened. Whether you see that as the audience having too much power or as the show being responsive to its community, it's a fascinating moment in the history of television. Brian's death and resurrection also changed how the audience watched every subsequent death on the show. After Brian came back, a certain amount of trust was broken. Fans became more skeptical about character deaths. When future characters died, there was always this little voice in the back of people's heads saying, "But are they really dead, or is the show going to bring them back in 2 episodes?" Brian's return created a credibility problem that the show is still dealing with over a decade later. That skepticism is actually why the showrunners have been so careful about confirming subsequent deaths. When Doug died off screen in season 21, Fox went out of their way to confirm to TV Line that the death was permanent. When Ernie the giant chicken was killed in season 23, executive producer Alex Sulkin gave interviews specifically to assure fans that Ernie was not coming back. The show has to actively work to convince its own audience that death means something, and that's a direct consequence of the Brian situation. In the end, Brian's death is both the most famous and the most complicated character death in Family Guy history. It proved that the show can do genuine emotion. It proved that main characters are off limits. It proved that fans have more power than writers sometimes realise. And it proved that even in a show about a fat guy and his talking dog, death matters to the people watching. For those 2 episodes in November 2013, Brian Griffin was dead, and the world of Family Guy felt genuinely darker without him. And honestly, that might be the most heartfelt thing this show has ever accidentally accomplished. Now, Brian's death was a choice. The writers decided to kill him and then decided to bring him back. But the next 2 deaths we need to talk about weren't choices at all. They happened because real people died in the real world, and Family Guy had to figure out how to say goodbye to characters who could never speak again. Mayor Adam West is, for my money, one of the best characters Family Guy ever created. And the reason he was so good is that he wasn't really created at all. He was just Adam West being himself, or at least a heightened cartoonish version of himself that somehow felt more authentic than the real thing. If you're too young to know who Adam West was before Family Guy, he was most famous for playing Batman in the 1960s television series. He was the original live-action Batman, the guy in the grey and blue suit with the POW and BAM sound effects. He was iconic for a very specific kind of camp performance that became synonymous with that era of superhero entertainment. But by the time Family Guy came around in 1999, Adam West's career had slowed down considerably, and he was mostly known as a former Batman who showed up at conventions and did the occasional guest spot on various shows. Family Guy changed that completely. The show introduced Mayor Adam West in Season 2 as the eccentric, unpredictable mayor of Quahog, and Adam West voiced the character himself. The joke wasn't that he was playing a character named after him. The joke was that this was supposed to literally be Adam West, the real actor who somehow became the mayor of a fictional Rhode Island town and was absolutely terrible at the job in the funniest possible way. Mayor Adam West was bizarre. He was impulsive, delusional, obsessed with random things, and completely unqualified to lead anything. He once married a cardboard cutout. He had a long-running feud with a fictional version of the Kool-Aid Man. He made decisions based on whatever thought happened to cross his mind at any given moment, and every single thing he said was delivered with this perfect, deadpan sincerity that made even the most ridiculous lines feel like genuine wisdom from a man who had completely lost touch with reality. The character appeared in the vast majority of episodes from Season 2 onward. He was a constant presence in Quahog, showing up at town events, making proclamations from his office, interfering with the Griffins' lives in ways that were always unexpected and always hilarious. Over 16 seasons, Mayor Adam West became one of the most beloved characters on the entire show. He was weird in a way that felt distinct from every other weird character on television. He wasn't crazy in a loud, manic way. He was crazy in a quiet, calm, completely confident way that made you wonder if maybe he was actually the sanest person in Quahog and everyone else was the problem. On June 9th, 2017, Adam West died at the age of 88. He passed away from leukemia at his home in Los Angeles. And when he died, he took Mayor Adam West with him. The show acknowledged his death in Season 17, Episode 20, an episode called Adam West High. In this episode, the characters learn that Mayor West has passed away, and the community comes together to honour his memory. Peter makes a video montage tribute. The high school gets renamed Adam West High in his honour, and in a genuinely touching moment, Mayor West's ghost appears to save Brian and Quagmire from falling off a cliff, suggesting that even in death, the weird old mayor of Quahog is still looking out for the people he cared about. What's really remarkable about the Adam West tribute episode is how the show handles the balance between comedy and genuine grief. Family Guy could have easily done a straightforward dramatic episode. They could have dropped the jokes entirely and made the whole thing a sincere memorial, but that wouldn't have been true to who Adam West was, either as a person or as a character. Instead, the show did what it does best. It made jokes, it was irreverent, it was weird, and in between all of that, it found moments of real emotional honesty that landed because they weren't trying too hard. The decision to replace Mayor Adam West with a new character called Mayor Wild West, voiced by Sam Elliott, was a smart move. They didn't try to recast the role or pretend a different actor could do what Adam West did. They created an entirely new character with a completely different personality, which was a way of acknowledging that Adam West was irreplaceable. You can fill the mayor's office, but you can't fill the hole that Adam West left in the show. That absence is permanent, and the show respects it by not trying to replicate what it lost. Now, Carrie Fisher's death hit the show in a similar way, but the handling was different. Carrie Fisher voiced Angela, Peter's boss, at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery. Angela replaced Mr. Weed as the person Peter reported to at work, and she became a significant recurring character over more than a decade of episodes. She was this joyless, exhausted woman who had zero patience for Peter's stupidity and spent most of her screen time looking like she wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. Angela was a great foil for Peter because she represented everything Peter wasn't. She was organised, responsible, competent at her job, and completely unwilling to put up with his antics. But over time, the show also gave Angela more depth. There were episodes where she showed genuine vulnerability, where you saw that underneath the tough exterior was a lonely woman who had given up on most of her dreams. In one episode, she even developed romantic feelings for Peter, which went nowhere, but added a layer of sadness to her character. Carrie Fisher died on December 27th, 2016. She passed away from cardiac arrest at the age of 60. She's best known, of course, as Princess Leia in Star Wars, but she had a long and varied career that included writing, acting, and advocacy for mental health awareness. Her role on Family Guy was just one small piece of a remarkable life, but it was a piece that the show clearly valued. The show wrote Angela out in Season 17, Episode 9, Poor Tucket Pete. The explanation given for her death was quintessentially Family Guy. During Peter's eulogy, he says that Angela died because she went swimming less than 20 minutes after she had eaten. It's a joke that sounds like a joke, which is probably exactly how Angela would have wanted to go out. Not with drama or tears, but with a dry punchline that nobody is quite sure whether to laugh at or not. Angela's role at the brewery was taken over by a couple named Bert and Sheila, who were intentionally the opposite of Angela in every way. Where Angela was bitter and burned out, Bert and Sheila were aggressively cheerful and enthusiastic about everything. It was the show's way of highlighting what was lost. Angela's particular brand of exhausted competence couldn't be replicated, so they went in the completely opposite direction, and the contrast made you miss Angela even more. These two deaths, Adam West and Angela, represent something that no amount of creative writing can prepare a show for. When a voice actor dies, the character dies with them. There's no way around it. You can't recast a character who is specifically designed around the personality and delivery of one particular human being. Mayor Adam West worked because Adam West was playing him. Angela worked because Carrie Fisher brought that specific, exhausted, sardonic energy to every line. Without those people, those characters simply cannot exist. That's the cruelest kind of death for a television show to deal with, because it's completely outside the writer's control. They can plan character deaths for years, build up to them carefully, make them meaningful and earned. But when a real person dies, the show has to react in real time, and the death becomes less about the character and more about the person behind the voice. The tribute episode for Adam West isn't really about a fictional mayor. It's about the show's love for the real man who brought that character to life for 16 years. And there's something really poignant about the fact that these characters will never appear in new episodes. Every other character on this show still has the potential for new stories. Peter can have new adventures, Stewie can hatch new plans, even dead characters could theoretically be brought back through dream sequences or flashbacks. But Mayor Adam West and Angela are locked in time. Their last episodes are genuinely their last episodes. There will never be another Mayor Adam West moment, because the only person who could create those moments is gone. When you're watching old episodes and Mayor Adam West shows up with one of his insane non sequiturs, or Angela sighs and rolls her eyes at Peter's latest disaster, you're watching something that can never be created again. Those performances are finite. The well is dry, and in a show that trades on infinite repetition and endless variations of the same gags, that finality is actually kind of profound. Both deaths also remind you of something that's easy to forget when you're watching an animated show. Every character you see on screen exists because a real person shows up to a recording studio and gives them a voice. When that person stops being able to show up, the character goes silent. Animation might make the drawings permanent, but the voices are always temporary, always dependent on the continued existence of real mortal human beings. The Adam West and Angela deaths are the saddest entries on this list, not because the fictional circumstances are tragic, but because the real circumstances are. These are characters who died because the people who made them real left this world, and the show handled both losses with a grace and sensitivity that it doesn't always show, which tells you that even Family Guy knows when it's time to put the jokes aside and just be honest about how much someone meant to them. Now, we've been talking about deaths that matter, deaths that changed the show or reflected real-world losses, but Family Guy has also killed characters for much pettier reasons, and honestly, those deaths are some of the most entertaining ones on the list. Let's talk about the evil babies. Stewie Griffin has had two major rivals over the course of Family Guy, and both of them are dead. The first was Bertram, who is one of the wildest characters the show ever produced. Bertram was Stewie's half-brother. Not in a normal way though, nothing about Bertram was normal. Bertram first appeared in Season 3, Episode 11, A Mission Impossible, and in that episode, he was literally a sperm cell. Stewie ventured inside Peter's body to prevent Lois from getting pregnant because he didn't want a new baby sibling, threatening his position as the youngest member of the family. Inside Peter's body, Stewie encountered Bertram, who was the strongest and smartest sperm, and the two of them fought for dominance. It was a battle between two potential babies that hadn't even been born yet, which is exactly the kind of premise that could only work on Family Guy. Bertram and Stewie reached a truce in that episode, and Lois and Peter decided not to have another baby, so Bertram seemed to be gone for good. But he came back in Season 4, Episode 22, Sibling Rivalry. Through a complicated chain of events involving Peter's vasectomy and a sperm bank mishap, Bertram ended up being born to a gym teacher and her partner. Once he was alive in the real world, Bertram turned out to be basically a mirror image of Stewie. Same football-shaped head, same megalomaniacal ambitions, same genius-level intelligence. But where Stewie's evil tendencies had been softening over the seasons, Bertram was fully committed to world domination with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Bertram was voiced by Wallace Shawn, who you probably recognise as Vizzini from The Princess Bride, the guy who kept saying inconceivable. Shawn brought this perfect mix of petulant rage and smug superiority to the character that made Bertram genuinely threatening in a way most Family Guy villains aren't. When Bertram was on screen, you actually believed he could hurt Stewie because he was just as smart and twice as ruthless. The final confrontation between Stewie and Bertram happened in Season 9, Episode 16, The Big Bang Theory, and it's one of the most ambitious episodes the show has ever done. Bertram somehow gets access to Stewie's time machine and decides to travel back in time to kill Stewie's ancestor, thereby erasing Stewie from existence entirely. His plan is to eliminate Stewie by making sure Stewie was never born. Stewie and Brian chase Bertram back through time and end up in Renaissance Italy, where they discover that Stewie's ancestor is Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah, the Leonardo da Vinci, the painter, the inventor, the polymath genius. The show establishes that da Vinci is on Lois's side of the family tree, which explains why Stewie is a genius, but also means that Bertram can kill da Vinci without erasing himself, since Bertram's connection to Peter's DNA runs through a different lineage. What happens next is genuinely impressive for an animated comedy. Bertram and Stewie fight across Renaissance Italy using Da Vinci's own inventions. They steal his flying machines and battle in mid-air. There are explosions and chases and dramatic confrontations on the ground. It plays like a legitimate action movie, and the stakes feel real because the show has established that if Bertram succeeds, not only will Stewie be erased, but the entire universe might cease to exist. The climax comes when Bertram gets the upper hand and holds Stewie, Brian, and Da Vinci at crossbow point. Stewie warns Bertram that killing Da Vinci will erase Stewie from existence, and since Stewie accidentally caused the Big Bang, that means the entire universe will be destroyed. Everything, everyone all of reality gone, and Bertram's response is chilling. He says essentially that erasing Stewie is worth destroying the entire universe. He hates Stewie so much that he's willing to annihilate all of existence just to make sure Stewie was never born. Bertram shoots Da Vinci in the chest, killing him, and in a rage, Stewie grabs the crossbow and shoots Bertram, first in the chest, then in the head. Bertram dies in Renaissance Italy, killed by his own half-brother with a medieval weapon, and the universe somehow survives because Stewie figures out a way to take Da Vinci's place in his own family tree. Bertram's death is one of the most satisfying villain deaths in the show's history because it feels earned. This wasn't a character who died for a gag or because the writers were bored with him. Bertram died in the climax of a 3-episode arc that pushed the show's storytelling capabilities to their absolute limit. He got a villain's death, complete with a dramatic final battle, a last act of defiance, and a definitive ending that left no room for comeback. When Stewie shot Bertram in the head with that crossbow, you knew this was permanent. Stewie's second rival was Doug, and Doug's death was the complete opposite of Bertram's in every possible way. Doug was introduced much later in the series as Stewie's daycare nemesis. He first appeared in season 17 and he was voiced by Chris Parnell, who you might know from Saturday Night Live, or as the voice of Jerry on Rick and Morty. Doug was this smarmy, smug toddler who was always one-upping Stewie at everything. He was better at school. He was more popular with the other kids. He had this infuriating confidence that drove Stewie absolutely crazy. The Stewie and Doug rivalry was essentially the show trying to recapture what worked about the Stewie and Bertram dynamic, but with a more grounded slice-of-life approach. Instead of time travel battles and universe-ending stakes, Stewie and Doug competed over normal toddler things, like who was more popular, who had better toys, and eventually, who would become the class snack captain at their daycare. Yes, that's a real storyline. Stewie and Doug ran competing campaigns for the right to choose what snacks the class would eat. Doug died in season 21, episode 10, The Candidate, and the way he died is so anticlimactic that it's almost impressive. During the Snack Captain campaign, Doug is killed off screen in a commuter plane crash. That's it. No dramatic confrontation, no epic battle, no final words or villain monologue. He just gets on a commuter plane, the plane crashes, and Doug is dead. Stewie wins the election by default. The show handled Doug's death so casually that a lot of fans weren't sure if it was real. After the Brian situation, where a major death was undone 2 episodes later, people were skeptical that the show would actually commit to killing another character. But Fox confirmed to TV Line that Doug was genuinely, permanently dead. He wasn't coming back. The commuter plane crash was it. The contrast between Bertram's death and Doug's death tells you everything about how Family Guy approaches character mortality. Bertram was a villain who deserved an epic send-off, and he got one. Time travel, crossbows, the fate of the universe hanging in the balance. Doug was an annoyance who the writers were done with, and he got an off-screen plane crash that was barely a footnote in the episode. The show matches the grandeur of the death to the significance of the character, which is actually a pretty elegant system when you think about it. There's also something funny about the meta-narrative of Stewie's rivals. The show tried twice to give Stewie a nemesis, and both times the nemesis ended up dead. Bertram got killed in an epic battle that pushed the boundaries of what the show could do. Doug got killed in a throwaway line that most viewers barely noticed. It's almost like Family Guy is saying that nobody can sustainably oppose Stewie. You either die in a blaze of glory, or you die in a commuter plane. But either way, you die. Both deaths are also permanent in a way that the show has been very clear about. Bertram's death in The Big Bang Theory was definitive on screen, with his corpse visible in Renaissance Italy. Doug's death was confirmed by both the show and by Fox's publicity department. Neither character has appeared since their deaths, and neither character is expected to return. In a show where death is often temporary and consequences are usually meaningless, Stewie's rivals stay dead. That's actually a pretty significant statement about the show's commitment to certain creative decisions. The evil baby deaths also reveal something about how the show handles recurring villains. Family Guy isn't really built for long-term antagonists the way other shows are. The format is too episodic, too focused on standalone stories that reset at the end of every half hour. Bertram and Doug both worked as opponents for Stewie in individual episodes, but the show never figured out how to sustain those rivalries over multiple seasons the way a more serialized show might. Killing them was the cleanest solution, and in both cases, it worked. Now, speaking of rivalries that lasted for decades, we need to talk about the most recent permanent death on Family Guy, and it's a big one. Because after 23 seasons and more epic fights than anyone can count, Ernie the giant chicken is officially dead. And this time, it was Meg who killed him. Remember to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying this deep dive. Okay, so to understand why Ernie's death matters, you need to understand how long this gag has been running and how central it became to the show's identity. Ernie the giant chicken first appeared in Season 2, Episode 3, an episode called Da Boom, which aired on December 26, 1999. That means this character has been part of Family Guy for over 25 years. A quarter century of one man fighting one chicken. The whole feud started over the dumbest possible thing. Ernie gave Peter an expired coupon. That's it, an expired coupon. And Peter took such violent offence to receiving an expired coupon from a giant chicken that the two of them got into a massive brawl that destroyed half of Quahog. Cars were flipped, buildings were wrecked, innocent bystanders were caught in the crossfire. And when it was over, Peter went right back to whatever he was doing before the fight started. Battered and bruised, but otherwise acting like nothing unusual had happened. That first fight established the template for every chicken fight that followed. Ernie would show up at random, usually interrupting whatever scene was happening. Peter and Ernie would lock eyes, and then they would fight, not a quick scuffle. An extended, minutes-long, elaborately choreographed action sequence that played like a blockbuster movie crammed into a cartoon. These fights destroyed neighborhoods. They crashed through buildings, fell off bridges, hijacked vehicles, and caused millions of dollars in property damage. They were the most expensive and time-consuming sequences for the animation team to produce, and they became one of the most recognizable running gags in all of television. Over 23 seasons, Peter and Ernie fought in almost every conceivable setting and scenario. They fought on rooftops and in sewers. They fought on boats and in airplanes. They fought in space and underwater. One fight involved them crashing through multiple dimensions. Another fight took place during a parody of Raiders of the Lost Ark. The fights got bigger and more absurd with every season, always pushing the limits of what the animation team could produce. The absolute peak of the chicken fights might have been the 2014 crossover episode with The Simpsons Guy, which aired as the Season 13 premiere. In that episode, Peter and Homer Simpson got into a chicken-style fight that involved characters from both shows and destroyed significant portions of both Quahog and Springfield. It was the ultimate version of the gag, combining two of the most famous animated families in television history in a destructive brawl that covered more ground and caused more chaos than any previous fight. And here's the thing about the chicken fights that a lot of people don't realize. They were incredibly difficult to produce. The animation for these sequences was far more complex than standard Family Guy scenes. Every punch, every crash, every vehicle flip had to be individually animated with a level of detail that the show's normal dialogue scenes don't require. The production crew spent weeks on these sequences, and according to executive producer Alex Sulkin, they became increasingly hard to top. Each new fight had to be bigger and more spectacular than the last, which meant more time, more resources, and more creative strain on a team that was also producing 20+ regular episodes per season. That production pressure is actually a big part of why Ernie died. but we'll get to that. Ernie wasn't just a fighting machine though. Over the seasons, the show gave him a family. He had a wife named Nicole. He had kids, including a son named Nugget, who would become important later. In a few episodes, we saw Ernie living a normal domestic life between fights with Peter, which added this weird layer to the rivalry. Ernie wasn't a monster. He was just a regular giant chicken trying to live his life, who happened to have a blood feud with a fat guy from Rhode Island. There's also an alternate universe version of the rivalry's origin. In the episode Meet the Quagmires, Peter travels back in time and accidentally punches Ernie while dancing at a party. This suggests that Peter might have actually started the feud, not Ernie, which recontextualizes the entire 20-year battle as Peter's fault. Ernie's friend even tells him not to worry about it, saying he'll probably never see Peter again. Obviously, that prediction didn't hold up. Seth MacFarlane originally planned to kill Ernie much earlier. According to the DVD commentary for The Simpsons Guy, MacFarlane wanted to end the chicken fights after the episode Internal Affairs, but animator Peter Shin convinced him to keep Ernie alive for a potential Family Guy movie. The movie never materialized in the way MacFarlane envisioned, and Ernie survived for another decade. So how did Ernie finally die? It happened in season 23, episode 5, The Chicken or the Meg, which aired on March 16th, 2025. The episode centers on Meg Griffin, who meets a boy at a dating show and starts a relationship with him. The twist is that the boy turns out to be Nugget, Ernie the giant chicken's teenage son. Meg is dating the son of her father's arch nemesis. What's interesting is that Ernie actually handles this situation better than Peter does, at least initially. Despite decades of violent conflict with Peter, Ernie welcomes Meg into his family with open wings. He doesn't hold Peter's behaviour against Meg. He lets her move in with Nugget. He's actually being a reasonable parent for once, which is more than Peter can usually manage. But things go wrong when Ernie gives Meg an ultimatum. He tells her that she can either cut ties with Peter completely or stop dating Nugget. She has to choose between her father and her boyfriend's family. And this is where Ernie makes his fatal mistake. Because Meg Griffin, the character that the entire show treats as worthless and disposable, does not respond well to ultimatums. Meg looks at Ernie and realizes something. Ernie is just like Peter. He's controlling. He's demanding. He wants to force the people around him to make impossible choices to satisfy his own ego. And Meg, who has spent her entire life being pushed around by her own father, decides that she's not going to take it from someone else's father too. So Meg decapitates Ernie the giant chicken in his front yard. His headless body runs around for a few seconds, the way chickens do when their heads are removed, and then collapses. The scene doesn't play the usual musical sting that typically signals an Ernie fight ending. In previous episodes, Ernie would always be shown getting back up after the fight, or there'd be a shot of him twitching, suggesting he survived. This time, there's nothing. Just a headless body on the lawn, and Meg walking away. For months after the episode aired, fans debated whether Ernie was really dead. This show had pulled the rug out from under audiences before. Brian died and came back. Peter has survived things that should have killed him 1,000 times over. Ernie himself had survived falls from buildings, explosions, and being impaled on various objects. Why would decapitation be any different? The answer came 7 months later, when executive producer Alex Sulkin confirmed Ernie's death in an interview with TV Line. His exact words were, "I think that the chicken has gone the way of all flesh." He explained that the production team had simply gotten the best out of the character. The fights were too hard to top. The animation was too expensive and time-consuming. And after the Simpsons crossover fight, which Sulkin's fellow executive producer, Richard Apple, described as the peak of the concept, there was nowhere left to take the gag. Ernie the giant chicken is dead. He's not coming back. After 23 seasons and 25 years, the longest running gag on Family Guy is permanently over. And the fact that Meg is the one who killed him is actually kind of perfect when you think about it. Meg is the character that the show treats as invisible. She's the punchline of every family joke. She's ignored, dismissed, belittled, and forgotten about by basically everyone in Quahog. She is, by the show's own framing, the least important member of the Griffin family. But Meg is the one who ended the chicken fights. Meg is the one who permanently killed a character that survived Peter's best efforts for over 2 decades. The family member everyone ignores did what nobody else in Quahog could do. She didn't need an elaborate action sequence or a dramatic showdown. She just got tired of being told what to do and handled it in the most direct way possible. There's something genuinely interesting about the show choosing Meg for this moment. It could have been Peter who finally killed Ernie. It could have been Stewie or Brian or some elaborate trap that Rick would have been proud of. Instead, it was the family's punching bag who stepped up and in one brutal move ended a 25-year-old grudge. Meg didn't just kill Ernie, she proved that the character everyone underestimates might actually be the most dangerous person in the Griffin household. Ernie's death also marks the end of an era for Family Guy in a broader sense. The chicken fights were one of the show's signature bits, one of the things that made it distinct from every other animated comedy on television. The Simpsons doesn't have anything like it. South Park doesn't have anything like it. American Dad doesn't have anything like it. The chicken fights were uniquely Family Guy, and now they're gone. The show will keep going, but it'll be missing one of the elements that made it special. Now, those are all the major permanent deaths on Family Guy. But before we wrap up, there are a few more characters who deserve to be mentioned, because the full picture of death in Quahog includes some names that people tend to forget about. Loretta Brown is one of those characters who died in a way that most Family Guy fans aren't even aware of, because technically she didn't die on Family Guy at all. Loretta was Cleveland's first wife. She appeared in the early seasons as part of the core friend group's extended family. Cleveland and Loretta were married, and while their relationship was never the focus of the show, Loretta was a presence in episodes that dealt with the guys' home lives and family dynamics. The reason Loretta's name comes up in a discussion about death is that she was killed off in the Cleveland Show, the spin-off series that ran from 2009 to 2013. Cleveland had already divorced Loretta before the spin-off started, partly because she had been having an affair with Quagmire, but the show decided to kill her anyway, in a callback to one of Family Guy's most famous recurring gags. You know the bit where Peter does something crazy near Cleveland's house, and Cleveland is always in the bathtub on the second floor, and the tub crashes through the wall, and Cleveland falls out yelling, "No, no, 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 no." Well, in the Cleveland Show, that gag happens to Loretta, and it kills her. The scene is actually kind of mean-spirited when you go back and watch it. Loretta's body is shown on the ground, and Peter and Quagmire make dismissive comments about her corpse. It's played for laughs in a way that feels uncomfortable, even by the show's standards. The behind-the-scenes reason for Loretta's death was reportedly that her voice actress, Alex Borstein, who also voices Lois, didn't want to continue doing Loretta's voice because it was too hard on her throat. Loretta's gravelly speaking style was physically difficult to maintain, so the simplest solution was to kill the character. Loretta's death is worth mentioning because it shows how deaths on Family Guy and its related shows can happen for purely practical reasons. Nobody was clamouring for a dramatic Loretta Brown death arc. The character hadn't been a major part of the show for years. She died because the logistics of keeping her alive were too inconvenient, which is honestly a pretty cold way to handle a character who had been on the show since the beginning. But there's a deeper layer to Loretta's death that connects to something the show has always been interested in, and that's the idea that some characters exist primarily to define other characters. Loretta didn't have much of a personality on her own. What she had was a relationship with Cleveland. She was his wife, and when she cheated on him with Quagmire, that betrayal became the defining moment of Cleveland's arc on Family Guy. Everything about Cleveland's emotional life on the show flows from Loretta's infidelity. His insecurity, his eagerness to please, his eventual move to a new town for the Cleveland show, his cautious approach to his second marriage with Donna. All of it traces back to Loretta. When a character like that dies, it's not really about losing them. It's about cementing what they meant to the characters who survived them. Loretta's death locked in her legacy as the woman who broke Cleveland's heart. She can't come back and complicate that narrative. She can't show up in a future episode and provide her side of the story. She's frozen as the villain of Cleveland's origin story, and that permanence gives Cleveland's emotional arc a weight that it wouldn't have if Loretta was still alive somewhere, potentially waiting to reappear. This is actually a pattern you see with several of the deaths on this list. Characters die, and in dying they become permanent fixtures of other characters' backstories, rather than active participants in ongoing stories. Francis Griffin's death made him a permanent symbol of Peter's difficult childhood, rather than a character who could evolve and change. Muriel's death made her a permanent source of Mort's loneliness, rather than a wife who might have eventually gotten her own storyline. Horace's death made the drunken clam a permanent monument to absent friends, rather than just a bar. Each death converts a living character into a memory, and memories are simpler and more powerful than living people because they can't contradict the stories we tell about them. This might actually be the most important function of permanent death on a show like Family Guy. It creates anchors in the past that give the present its emotional weight. Every character who has died is a reason for the living characters to feel something, to remember something, to carry something with them that they didn't have before. The dead don't just disappear, they become part of the emotional architecture of the show, supporting structures that hold up storylines they'll never appear in. Then there's new Brian, the replacement dog from the 2 episodes after Brian died. When the Griffins adopted Vinny as their new pet, there was a brief period where the show was clearly testing whether audiences would accept a new canine member of the family. Vinny was a decent enough character on his own, this old-school Italian-American dog with street smarts and a blue-collar attitude, but he was fighting against decades of audience loyalty to Brian Griffin. When Brian came back via time-traveling Christmas guy, Vinny was erased from the timeline entirely. He didn't die in the traditional sense, he simply never existed in the restored timeline. But the effect is the same. A character who was part of the show for 2 episodes ceased to be, and he's never been referenced since. Vinny's erasure is a weird case study in what happens when a show tries to replace a beloved character and the audience says no. He was designed to be Brian's permanent replacement, and instead he became a footnote that most fans barely remember. We should also circle back to the murder mystery episode to mention a couple of victims who often get overlooked. Stephanie was Quagmire's date at James Woods' dinner party. Priscilla was James Woods' date. Both were killed by Diane Simmons during her rampage, and both are permanently dead. These characters weren't recurring in any meaningful way, but their deaths contribute to the body count of what might be the most consequential single episode in the show's history. Diane killed at least 4 people that night, and all 4 of those deaths stuck. There's also Mrs. Wilson, who is a fascinating footnote in Family Guy's relationship with real-world death. Mrs. Wilson appeared in a season 7 episode as Peter's elementary school teacher. She was voiced by Debbie Reynolds, which is notable because Debbie Reynolds was Carrie Fisher's mother. When Debbie Reynolds died in December 2016, just one day after her daughter, Carrie Fisher, passed away, Family Guy lost 2 voice actresses from the same family within 24 hours. Mrs. Wilson later appeared in a season 20 episode where Peter hallucinates seeing every character the show has killed off, which was the show's quiet way of acknowledging Reynolds' passing. Now, I've been walking you through every permanent death on this show for a while now, and if you're still with me, you might be starting to see some patterns emerge, because when you look at all of these deaths together, lined up in order, they tell you a story about how Family Guy has evolved as a show over the course of 24 seasons. In the early years, death was a plot device. Mr. Weed died so Peter could get a new job. Francis died so Peter could discover his real father. These were functional deaths. They existed to move the story forward, and the show didn't waste a lot of time mourning the characters it lost. The early Family Guy was brash and confident, and didn't think too hard about consequences. Characters died when they needed to die, and the show kept moving. In the middle years, death became a spectacle. The "and then there were fewer" murder mystery was the show flexing its creative muscles, proving that it could do a different genre and do it well. The Diane Simmons reveal, the multiple bodies, the dramatic confrontation on the cliff, all of it was the show saying, we can be more than just cutaway gags and fart jokes. Death became an opportunity for the writers to showcase their ambitions and push the boundaries of what an animated comedy could do. Then Brian's death in 2013 was the turning point. It was the moment where the show learned that there are limits to how far you can push the audience. You can kill background characters and supporting players all day long, but the second you threaten a core member of the family, the audience will revolt. Brian's death and resurrection taught the writers that their creative freedom has boundaries, and those boundaries are defined by the audience's emotional investment in the characters. That's a lesson that every subsequent death on the show has been shaped by. The Adam West and Angela deaths represent a completely different category, one where the show has no control at all. These are deaths that happen because real people die and the show has to adapt. There's no creative strategy behind them. There's no story purpose. There's just loss and the question of how to handle it with grace. The way Family Guy navigated both of these deaths, with a mix of humour and genuine respect, showed a maturity that the show doesn't always display. It proved that underneath the offensive jokes and the boundary-pushing content, there are people who actually care about the human beings behind the characters. And the most recent deaths, Doug and Ernie, represent a show that's becoming increasingly comfortable with letting go of its own history. Doug was killed because the writers exhausted his potential. Ernie was killed because the production team couldn't keep topping itself. Both deaths are the show recognizing that not every gag needs to run forever, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for a recurring bit is to end it before it becomes stale. That takes a certain kind of creative courage, especially for a show that's been running as long as Family Guy has. When you look at the full timeline of permanent deaths on Family Guy, you're really looking at the show's autobiography. The early deaths tell you about a young show finding its voice. The middle deaths tell you about a show discovering its ambitions. Brian's death tells you about the complicated relationship between creators and audiences. The real-world deaths tell you about the fragility of the human beings behind animation. And the recent deaths tell you about a show that's old enough to start dismantling the things that made it famous. There's something that the reference to animated deaths tends to miss, and it's the cumulative effect of all these losses on the fictional world of Quahog. When Mr. Weed died, the toy factory closed. When Horace died, the drunken clam lost its heart. When Diane died, the news desk lost its most familiar face. When Mayor Adam West died, the town lost its leader. When Ernie died, the show lost its most iconic recurring gag. Each individual death changed something small about the world. But put them all together, and Quahog in Season 24 is a fundamentally different place than Quahog in Season 1. The town has fewer businesses. The news is anchored by different people. The bar has a different bartender. The mayor's office has a different occupant. The brewery has different management. Peter's extended family is smaller. Stewie's enemies are all gone. The streets are quieter because the chicken fights are over. These changes happened gradually, one death at a time, over the course of 25 years. But when you catalogue them all in one sitting, the way we've been doing, the scope of the change is actually pretty staggering. This is what makes death meaningful in a long-running show. It's not the individual moments, although some of them are genuinely affecting. It's the gradual erosion of the familiar. It's the slow recognition that the world you fell in love with when you started watching is not the same world that exists today. Characters you used to see every week are gone. Dynamics that used to anchor the show have shifted. The Quahog of 1999 and the Quahog of 2025 share a name and a basic cast, but they're not the same place. Death made them different. And here's what I think is the most interesting observation about all of this. Family Guy pretends that nothing matters. That's literally the thesis of the show. Every episode resets. Every consequence is temporary. Peter can destroy the town, and it'll be fine next week. Stewie can try to kill Lois, and she'll be alive in the next scene. The show's entire comedic philosophy is built on the idea that actions don't have permanent consequences. But the dead characters prove that's not true. Mr. Weed never came back. Francis never came back. Diane, Muriel, Derek, Horace, Paddy, Vern, Johnny, Bertram, Mayor Adam West, Angela, Doug, Ernie, they're all gone. Their deaths are the exception to the show's rule of impermanence. And those exceptions are what give Family Guy its hidden emotional depth. Because if everything on the show really was temporary and meaningless, none of these deaths would register. You'd watch a character die and think, hey, they'll be back. But we don't think that, because the show has proven over and over again that some deaths stick. And when you know that death is possible, even in a world as cartoonish and absurd as Quahog, it changes how you watch every episode. You pay a little more attention, you appreciate the characters a little more, you hold on a little tighter to the ones that are still here, because you know they might not be here forever. That tension between the show's surface-level chaos and its underlying permanence is what makes Family Guy more complex than it gets credit for. It's not just a show about a fat guy who gets into trouble. It's a show about a world that changes over time, a world where people leave and don't come back, a world where the funny parts exist alongside the sad parts, and neither one cancels out the other. The dead characters are the proof that Family Guy, for all its crudeness and shock value, actually cares about the world it created. You don't make deaths permanent unless you believe the world those characters inhabited is real enough to be changed by their absence. Think about it this way. If Family Guy was really as nihilistic as it pretends to be, it would bring everyone back. There would be no permanent deaths. Every character who ever appeared would still be available for future stories. But the show chooses not to do that. It chooses to let people go. It chooses to accept loss. And that choice, repeated over and over again across 24 seasons, is actually one of the most quietly profound things about the entire series. Now let's go a little deeper on something that I've been thinking about throughout this entire video, and it's the question of what each death reveals about the living characters who are left behind. Because that's the other thing about permanent death on a long-running show. The dead don't change. They're frozen in time, exactly as they were when they left. But the living characters keep going, and they're shaped by every loss they experience. When you look at the Griffin family through the lens of who they've lost, you see a family that has been quietly accumulating grief for 24 years without ever really processing it. Peter Griffin has lost his stepfather, his biological mother, his boss, his local bartender, his town's mayor, his work supervisor, and his arch nemesis. That's a lot of death for one man, even a cartoon one. And the way Peter handles each of these losses tells you something about how the character has evolved over the show's run. When Francis died, Peter barely flinched. He was relieved. He moved on to the next adventure without looking back. When Thelma died, Peter was visibly affected, but quickly got distracted by Evelyn. When Brian died, Peter cried actual tears, and the show let him be genuinely sad. There's a trajectory there. Peter started the show as someone who was emotionally impervious to loss. Nothing could touch him. Nothing could slow him down. But over time, death started breaking through his defenses. By the time Brian died in season 12, Peter was capable of real grief in a way that the Peter of season 3, who barely blinked when Mr. Weed choked to death at his dinner table, never could have been. The deaths didn't just change Quahog, they changed Peter. Stewie's relationship with death is even more complicated. Stewie has personally killed two of his major rivals, Bertram and, indirectly, Doug. He shot Diane Simmons off a cliff. He gunned down Vern and Johnny in cold blood and broke the fourth wall to tell the audience they were staying dead. Stewie is responsible for more permanent deaths on this show than any other character, and the way he handles each one is different. When Stewie killed Bertram, it was an act of rage and survival. Bertram had killed Leonardo da Vinci and was threatening the entire universe. Stewie grabbed the crossbow and shot his half-brother in the chest and head. It was violent, it was desperate, and it was the culmination of a rivalry that had been building since season 1. Stewie killed Bertram because he had to, and the weight of that act showed on his face. When Stewie killed Vern and Johnny, it was a punchline. He shot them, turned to the camera, and made a joke about it. There was no emotional weight, no hesitation, no aftermath. It was Stewie functioning as the show's weapon for killing off unwanted characters, and he did it with the cheerful efficiency of someone taking out the trash. When Stewie killed Diane Simmons, it was protective. Diane was about to kill Lois, and Stewie intervened with his signature line about being the only one allowed to take his mother down. It was violent, but it was motivated by a twisted kind of love. Stewie may want to kill Lois himself someday, but he'll be damned if he lets anyone else do it. Each of these killings reveals a different facet of Stewie's character. The rage, the coldness, the protective instinct, the dark humour. Stewie is the angel of death on Family Guy, the character most often tasked with delivering permanent endings, and the way he approaches each death tells you what kind of mood the show is in at that particular moment in its history. Brian Griffin's near-death experience also changed him in ways that the show has quietly explored in subsequent seasons. Being dead for 2 episodes and then resurrected via time travel is not something a character can just walk away from. Brian's post-resurrection stories have occasionally touched on themes of mortality and purpose, suggesting that his brush with death gave him a new perspective on how he spends his time. He's still a pretentious, heavy-drinking, failed writer who chases women way too young for him, but there's an undercurrent of awareness in later Brian episodes that wasn't there before. He almost lost everything, and even though the show restored him, the character seems to remember what the void felt like. The way death affects the other characters in Quahog is also worth examining. Mort Goldman lost his wife Muriel in the murder mystery episode, and while the show rarely explores his grief directly, you can feel it in the way Mort is written in subsequent episodes. He's lonelier, he's weirder, he clings to the people around him more desperately. Mort was always a bit of a pathetic character, but losing Muriel made him more isolated, and that isolation has quietly informed his characterization for over a decade. Tom Tucker lost his co-anchor, Diane Simmons, and while the show plays that loss mostly for comedy, the dynamic of the Quahog 5 news desk has never quite recovered. Every co-anchor who has replaced Diane has been a pale imitation, and the show seems aware of this. The news segments don't have the same energy they used to. Tom Tucker is still there, but his other half is gone, and you can feel the absence even when the show doesn't explicitly reference it. Cleveland Brown lost Loretta, his first wife, and while Cleveland has since remarried and even had his own spin-off show, the shadow of Loretta hangs over his character in interesting ways. Cleveland's second marriage to Donna, which happened during the Cleveland show, is partially defined by the failure of his first marriage. He tries harder with Donna, specifically because things went so wrong with Loretta. Loretta's death, even though it happened on a different show, is part of Cleveland's emotional DNA on Family Guy. Joe Swanson has been relatively untouched by the permanent deaths on the show, which is interesting because Joe is arguably the character most closely associated with physical suffering and disability. Joe has dealt with paralysis, multiple surgeries, and episodes of depression, but the show has never taken anyone permanently away from him. Bonnie is still alive. His kids are still alive. His colleagues are still alive. In a show full of permanent death, Joe has been weirdly protected from that specific kind of loss. Maybe the writers feel that Joe has already suffered enough with his disability, or maybe they're saving a devastating loss for him in a future season. Either way, Joe's immunity to permanent death on a show where everyone else is fair game is a notable pattern. Quagmire has also been largely spared from losing people he cares about. His dates have died, particularly Stephanie in the murder mystery episode, but Quagmire doesn't form attachments deep enough for those deaths to register as real losses. Quagmire is the show's designated shallow character, the guy who treats relationships as disposable, and so death doesn't wound him the way it wounds Peter or Cleveland or Mort. You could kill off every woman Quagmire has ever been with, and he'd probably just move on to the next one. That emotional armour is part of what makes Quagmire such a consistent character, but it also means the show can't really use death as a storytelling tool, with him the way it can with the other members of the group. The question that keeps coming up when you catalogue all these deaths is whether Family Guy has used death well or poorly over its 24-season run. And honestly, the answer is both. The show has produced some genuinely affecting death moments. Brian's death scene on the vet's table is legitimately moving. The Adam West tribute episode is heartfelt and respectful. The Diane Simmons villain reveal is genuinely surprising and dramatically satisfying. These are moments where death elevated the show, pushed it to be better than its usual self, and produced some of the best episodes in the series. But the show has also used death lazily. Paddy was killed because the writers hated him. Vern and Johnny were killed because the gag wasn't working. Doug was killed off-screen in a plane crash. These are deaths that exist for housekeeping rather than storytelling, and while they serve a practical purpose, they don't add anything to the emotional fabric of the show. They're just cleanup, crossing names off a list. The best deaths on Family Guy are the ones that change how you think about the characters who are left behind. Diane's death changes how you watch Tom Tucker. Mr. Weed's death changes how you think about Peter's career. Brian's death changes how you value his conversations with Stewie. Adam West's death changes how you experience the town of Quahog itself. These are deaths that ripple outward, affecting the living characters and the audience in ways that persist long after the episode is over. The worst deaths are the ones that just remove a character without leaving any trace. Nobody's life is different because Paddy is gone. Nobody misses Vern and Johnny in a way that affects future storylines. These characters were subtracted from the show, but not mourned by it, and that lack of mourning makes their deaths feel cheap rather than meaningful. The really interesting thing is that the show seems to be getting better at death as it ages. The early deaths were functional, the middle deaths were dramatic, the recent deaths are more considered and deliberate. Ernie's death, for all its violence, was clearly the result of careful thought about what the show needed and what the character had left to give. The writers didn't kill Ernie on a whim. They killed him because they had exhausted the creative possibilities of the character and wanted to end the gag while it still had some dignity left. That's mature creative decision-making from a show that spent its first decade being anything but mature. If Family Guy continues for another 10 or 20 years, which is entirely possible given how long animated shows tend to run, the question becomes who dies next. Which recurring characters are reaching the end of their usefulness? Which gags are running out of steam? Which voice actors are aging in ways that might affect their ability to continue? These are the practical considerations that drive character deaths on a long-running animated series. And Family Guy has proven that it's willing to make the hard calls when the time comes. But before we speculate about the future, I want to spend some time on something that connects all these deaths together in a way I haven't touched on yet. And that's the behind-the-scenes reality of why animated shows kill characters in the first place. Live-action shows kill characters all the time. Actors leave for better opportunities. Contracts expire. Creative differences arise. An actor might get a movie deal or have a personal conflict with the showrunner, and the easiest solution is to write their character out permanently. In live-action television, character death is often a business decision disguised as a creative one, Animated shows work differently. The voice actors don't appear on screen, so there's no visual disruption when someone leaves. You can theoretically recast any character at any time. Family Guy itself has done this multiple times. Meg was originally voiced by Lacey Chabert in Season 1 before Mila Kunis took over the role, starting with Darboom in Season 2. Cleveland was voiced by Mike Henry for 19 seasons before Arif Zahir assumed the role in Season 20, after Henry publicly stepped down, saying that persons of colour should play characters of colour. Death was originally voiced by Norm MacDonald, before Adam Carolla took over later. Even Connie D'Amico was originally voiced by Fairuza Balk, before being permanently recast with Lisa Wilhoit. The point is, Family Guy has proven repeatedly that it can swap voice actors without killing characters. When Lacey Chabert left, Meg didn't die. When Mike Henry stepped down from Cleveland, Cleveland didn't die. The show just brought in new voices and kept going, which means that when the show does kill a character, it's almost never because they had to, it's because they wanted to. That distinction matters a lot when you're evaluating the show's track record with death. Mr. Weed didn't die because Carlos Alazraqui left the show. He died because the writers wanted to close the toy factory and send Peter to a new job. Francis didn't die because Charles Durning couldn't voice him anymore. He died because the writers wanted to reveal Peter's biological father. Diane didn't die because Laurie Allen was leaving. She died because the writers had a murder mystery story they wanted to tell. The only exceptions are Adam West and Angela, who died specifically because their voice actors died in real life. Those are the only two cases where external circumstances forced the show's hand. Every other death was a creative choice, freely made by writers who could have kept those characters alive indefinitely if they wanted to. That makes every permanent death on Family Guy a deliberate, artistic statement. The writers looked at a character who was still available to them, who could still appear in future episodes, who still had stories left to tell, and they chose to end that character's existence. They chose to subtract rather than add. In a medium where every character is just a drawing and a voice, where nobody ages and nobody has to retire, choosing death is choosing limitation. And limitation is what gives art its shape. Think about the specific creative decisions behind each death and what they tell you about the writer's priorities at different points in the show's history. When Mr. Weed died in Season 3, the writers were still figuring out what Family Guy was. The show had been cancelled once already and was in the early stages of its resurrection. Killing Mr. Weed was an experiment, a test to see whether permanent change could work within the show's format. The writers were asking themselves, can we actually do this? Can we kill a character and make it stick? And the answer was yes, and that gave them the confidence to do it again. When Francis and Paddy died in Season 5, the show was in its post-cancellation comeback era. It had been off the air for 2 years and was back with something to prove. The Season 5 deaths feel aggressive in retrospect, like the writers are clearing out characters they don't need anymore to make room for the stories they actually want to tell. Francis and Paddy and Vern and Johnny all died within a few episodes of each other, which is a lot of permanent death in a short span. It reads like a show that's renovating itself, tearing out the old fixtures to make space for new ones. When Diane, Muriel and Derek died in the Season 9 premiere, the show was at the peak of its creative ambition. And then there were fewer is a flex. It's the writers saying, look what we can do when we actually try. The murder mystery format allowed them to combine comedy, drama, and genuine surprise in a way that regular episodes don't permit. Killing 3 characters in one night was a statement of confidence, a show that knew exactly what it was and wasn't afraid to take risks. When Brian died in Season 12, the show was entering its veteran era. 12 seasons is a long time for any television show, and by that point, Family Guy had settled into a comfortable groove that some fans were starting to find predictable. Brian's death was a disruption of that comfort, a way of telling the audience that even after 12 years, the show could still surprise them. The fact that they reversed the death 2 episodes later doesn't negate the impact of the initial choice. It just adds a layer of complexity about the relationship between creators and consumers. When Adam West and Angela died in season 17, the show was grappling with something it had never dealt with before: the real world intruding on the fictional one. These deaths weren't about creative choices or storytelling opportunities. They were about loss, and the show's response to that loss was tellingly sincere. The show didn't try to be edgy or provocative about these deaths. It tried to be respectful. And for a show that has built its brand on being disrespectful, that sincerity felt significant. When Doug died in season 21 and Ernie died in season 23, the show was in its legacy era. Over 2 decades old, still producing new episodes, still finding stories to tell. These deaths feel like the show making peace with its own history. Doug's death was the show admitting it couldn't sustain another Stewie rival. Ernie's death was the show admitting it couldn't top its own most famous gag. Both deaths are acts of creative maturity, the kind of decisions that only a show with decades of experience would feel comfortable making. Each era of death corresponds to an era of the show's identity, and tracking those eras gives you a map of Family Guy's creative evolution that you can't get from just watching random episodes. The deaths are the mile markers. They tell you where the show has been and where it's going. There's also something worth saying about how Family Guy's approach to death compares to other long-running animated shows. The Simpsons has killed off relatively few recurring characters permanently. Maud Flanders is probably the most notable example, and her death in season 11 remains controversial to this day. South Park kills Kenny in almost every episode, but that's a structural gag rather than a permanent loss. Bob's Burgers hasn't killed anyone permanently. King of the Hill killed Cotton Hill in its later seasons. But none of these shows have used permanent death as consistently or as deliberately as Family Guy has. Family Guy occupies a unique space in the landscape of animated comedy because it treats death as a real storytelling tool rather than just a joke or a gimmick. The show has killed characters for business reasons, for creative reasons, for dramatic reasons, and for reasons of pure annoyance. It has killed characters in epic action sequences and in off-screen plane crashes. It has killed characters to honor real people who died and to punish fictional people who overstayed their welcome. No other animated comedy has explored death from this many angles over this many years, and this is something that even the show's biggest critics tend to overlook. Family Guy gets a lot of grief for being crude, for being offensive, for relying too heavily on cutaway gags and shock humor. And a lot of that criticism is fair. The show can be lazy, it can be mean-spirited, it can reach for the easy laugh when a more thoughtful approach would serve the story better. But when it comes to permanent character death, Family Guy has been remarkably thoughtful and varied in its approach. Each death we've discussed tonight was handled differently. Each one served a different purpose, and each one left a different kind of mark on the show. Compare that to how some other long-running comedies handle loss. Seinfeld ran for 9 seasons and never permanently killed a recurring character, unless you count Susan Ross dying from licking toxic envelopes, which the characters famously didn't care about at all. Friends ran for 10 seasons, and the most significant death was Mr. Heckles, the downstairs neighbour who served mainly as a plot device to make Chandler think about his own mortality for 22 minutes. Even shows that are built around death, like 6 Feet Under, don't use death as a recurring structural element the way Family Guy does. The closest comparison might actually be Game of Thrones, which is a very different kind of show, but shares Family Guy's willingness to kill characters the audience has grown attached to. Game of Thrones used death to create tension and stakes in a fantasy world where audiences might otherwise feel too safe. Family Guy uses death to create permanence in a comedy world where audiences assume everything resets. Both shows learned that death is the most effective way to tell an audience that the rules of this world are different from what you expected. When Ned Stark died, Game of Thrones told viewers that nobody was safe. When Mr. Weed died, Family Guy told viewers that some changes are forever. The scale is different, the genre is different, but the underlying principle is the same. What makes Family Guy's approach particularly interesting is that it doesn't use death consistently. Some seasons have multiple permanent deaths, other seasons have none. There's no schedule, no pattern, no way to predict when the show will decide to permanently remove a character. That unpredictability is actually part of what makes the deaths effective. If you knew that every season premiere was going to kill someone, you'd brace yourself for it and the impact would be lessened. But because the deaths come at random intervals, sometimes years apart, they always catch you off guard. You're never fully prepared for a permanent death on Family Guy, and that element of surprise is what gives the deaths their emotional punch. And that comprehensive approach to death is what makes this video possible in the first place. You couldn't make a 2-hour deep dive into the permanent deaths on The Simpsons because there aren't enough of them to fill the time. You couldn't make one for Bob's Burgers because the show almost never kills anyone. But Family Guy has produced enough permanent, meaningful, verified deaths to fill 2 hours of analysis, and that's because the show has never been afraid to lose the characters it created. The really fascinating question is what all of this death says about Seth MacFarlane as a creator. MacFarlane is someone who has talked publicly about the fact that he was supposed to be on American Airlines Flight 11 on September 11th, 2001. He missed the flight because he was hungover and his travel agent gave him the wrong departure time. That brush with real death, that close call that could have ended his life before Family Guy had even reached its 3rd season, has to inform how he thinks about mortality and loss. You can see it in the way the show handles death. There's a casualness to some of the deaths that feels like someone who has made peace with the randomness of when and how people die. Mr. Weed chokes on a bread roll. Horace gets hit by a baseball. Doug dies in a commuter plane crash. These are sudden, random, meaningless deaths, the kind of deaths that happen every day in the real world to real people. MacFarlane, who nearly died in a random, meaningless way himself, seems drawn to portraying death as something that happens without warning or purpose. But there's also a reverence for death when it matters. The Adam West tribute episode. The sincerity of Brian's death scene. The way the show paused its jokes long enough to let Stewie grieve his dying dog on the vet's table. MacFarlane knows the difference between death as comedy and death as tragedy, and the show reflects both of those understandings. Sometimes death is funny. Sometimes death is devastating. Sometimes it's both at once. And those are the moments when Family Guy is at its absolute best. There's a version of this conversation that's cynical. You could argue that Family Guy only uses death for attention, for ratings, for social media buzz. You could point to Brian's death as a calculated publicity stunt and dismiss every other death as the show copying that playbook. You could say that a show built on fart jokes and offensive humour has no business trying to do genuine emotion, and that every attempt at sincerity is undermined by the episode that immediately follows it. But I don't think that's entirely fair, because the thing about long-running shows is that they don't stay the same over time. The Family Guy of 1999 was a different show than the Family Guy of 2010, which was a different show than the Family Guy of 2025. The people writing it have changed. The people watching it have changed. The cultural context has changed. And within all of that change, the show's permanent deaths serve as anchor points. They're the moments where the show stopped pretending that nothing matters and admitted that some things do. Mr. Weed's death matters because it started something. Diane's death matters because it revealed something. Brian's death matters because it proved something. Adam West's death matters because it honoured something. Ernie's death matters because it ended something. Each permanent death on Family Guy serves a purpose beyond just removing a character from the show. They mark the passage of time. They track the show's growth. They remind the audience that even in a world of infinite cutaway gags and reset buttons, some changes are permanent. If you've made it this far into this video, you've heard about every single recurring character that Family Guy has permanently killed off. From Mr. Weed choking on a bread roll in Season 3 to Ernie the giant chicken losing his head in Season 23, we've covered over 2 decades of death in Quahog. We've talked about accidental deaths and murder mysteries. We've talked about deaths driven by creative choices and deaths caused by real-world tragedy. We've talked about characters who died because the writers loved them, and characters who died because the writers couldn't stand them. And if you're lying in bed right now, listening to this in the dark, maybe drifting in and out of sleep, I want to leave you with one last thought about what all of this means. Family Guy is a show about a family. Not a perfect family, not even a particularly good family, but a family that keeps going, episode after episode, season after season, year after year. The Griffins have lost people, they've lost Peter's parents, they've lost their dog, even if only temporarily. They've lost their mayor, their bartender, their news anchor, their boss, and the giant chicken that used to show up and destroy their neighbourhood every few episodes. Quahog is emptier now than it was when the show started, and it's going to keep getting emptier as time goes on. But the Griffins are still there. Peter is still sitting at the bar, even if the bartender is different. Stewie is still plotting world domination, even if all his rivals are dead. Brian is still alive, still sipping martinis, still having conversations with Stewie that somehow combine the profound and the ridiculous in equal measure. The family persists. That's what families do. They absorb loss and keep moving forward, not because they're heroic or strong, but because there's nothing else to do. The alternative to continuing is stopping. And stopping isn't really an option when there are still episodes to make and stories to tell. Every character who died on this show was part of the fabric of the Griffin family's world, and every one of them left a space behind when they were gone. That's what death does in cartoons and in real life. It doesn't just remove a person, it removes the possibility of every future moment you might have had with them. Every joke Diane Simmons will never deliver. Every eccentric decree Mayor Adam West will never make. Every insult Angela will never aim at Peter. Every punch Ernie the giant chicken will never throw. Those moments are gone now, and they're not coming back. But the show goes on. Quahog wakes up every week with slightly fewer characters than it had before, and it makes something new out of what remains. That's not nihilism, that's resilience, and it's the part of Family Guy that nobody talks about, because it's hidden under 24 seasons of offensive jokes and cartoon violence. But if you know where to look, it's there. It's been there the whole time. That's it for today's video. If you enjoyed this deep dive into every killed-off character in Family Guy history, subscribe to our channel for more long-form lore content. And if you're about to fall asleep, sweet dreams. Just try not to dream about giant chickens. And actually, before I go, there's one more thing I want to talk about, because I think it ties this whole video together in a way that might surprise you. There's something kind of strange about the fact that you're listening to a 2-hour breakdown of every death on a comedy show, possibly while trying to fall asleep. If you think about it, this entire video is basically an obituary, a really long, really detailed obituary for 16 fictional characters who existed in a cartoon about a fat guy from Rhode Island. And the fact that we can fill 2 hours talking about their deaths, that there's enough material and enough emotional weight and enough behind-the-scenes context to justify this kind of deep dive, tells you something important about what these characters meant to people. Nobody asks for a 2-hour breakdown of characters who didn't matter. Nobody wants to hear the complete history of a death that didn't register. The reason this video exists, the reason you clicked on it, or let it autoplay, or deliberately put it on to fall asleep to, is because somewhere in the back of your mind you care about these characters, even the minor ones, even the ones whose names you couldn't remember until I reminded you. There's a part of your brain that filed away the death of Horace the bartender, or Diane Simmons the news anchor, or Mayor Adam West, and that filing happened because those characters occupied space in your imagination for years, sometimes decades, before they were taken away. That's the thing about long-form content and long-running shows. The attachment happens gradually. You don't decide to care about Mayor Adam West on a Tuesday afternoon. You absorb him over the course of hundreds of episodes, each one depositing a tiny layer of familiarity into your subconscious, until one day you hear that Adam West has died, and you feel a pang of sadness that surprises you. You didn't know you cared that much, but the show had been building that connection for 16 years, one weird mayoral decree at a time, and when the connection was severed, you felt it. The same is true for every character on this list. Mr. Weed existed for 3 seasons, but those 3 seasons were formative for a lot of viewers who started watching Family Guy in the early 2000s. Francis Griffin showed up in maybe a dozen episodes across 5 seasons, but every single one of those appearances was memorable because he was so unpleasant. Diane Simmons appeared in the background of 9 seasons worth of episodes, hundreds of news desk scenes where she was just part of the scenery, and then one day the scenery came alive and tried to murder everyone. Each of these characters was a thread in the fabric of a show that millions of people have watched for decades, and pulling those threads out changed the shape of the fabric, even if most people wouldn't notice unless someone pointed it out to them. Which is what this video has been doing for the past 2 hours, pointing out the threads that have been pulled, showing you the shape of the holes they left behind. And there's something genuinely comforting about doing that as a sleep video, which I know sounds weird, but hear me out. Sleep content works because it gives your brain something familiar and non-threatening to process while you drift off. The best sleep videos aren't exciting or suspenseful. They're warm and meandering and full of details that your brain can engage with at whatever level it wants. You can listen closely or let the words wash over you. You can follow the logic or just enjoy the rhythm of someone talking about something they clearly care about. Death, when it's discussed in this kind of calm, analytical way, isn't scary. It's just part of the story. And stories are exactly the kind of thing that helps people fall asleep. Because stories have been putting humans to sleep since before we had written language. Ancient people gathered around fires and listened to someone talk about things that happened, things that were lost, things that changed, and the steady rhythm of those stories carried them into unconsciousness. That's essentially what this video is. A really long campfire story about the people who left Quahog and never came back. The other thing about death in the context of a show like Family Guy is that it's ultimately about time passing. Every death we've covered tonight is a marker of time. Mr. Weed's death marks the transition from early Family Guy to the show's first reinvention. Diane's death marks the peak of the show's creative ambition. Brian's death marks the moment the show learned about its own limitations. Adam West's death marks the intrusion of real mortality into a fictional world. Ernie's death marks the end of the show's longest-running tradition. When you line all of these deaths up, what you're really looking at is a clock. A 24-year clock that measures how long this show has been part of your life and how much it's changed during that time. If you started watching Family Guy when it premiered in 1999, you were a different person then than you are now. You've aged, you've changed. People in your own life have come and gone. And all the while, in the background, this cartoon has been quietly aging alongside you, losing characters the way you lose friends and family members, accumulating absences the way all of us do as the years go by. Maybe that's why this kind of content works so well for sleep, because it mirrors the experience of lying in bed at night and thinking about all the things that have changed since you were young. The people who aren't here anymore, the places that don't exist anymore, the experiences you can't have again. It's melancholy, but it's not depressing. It's just honest. And honesty, delivered in a calm voice at 2 a.m, is one of the most effective sleeping pills in the world. So here's where we actually end. 16 characters, 24 seasons, 25 years of a show that pretends nothing matters, but keeps proving that some things do. Mr. Weed choked on a dinner roll and changed Peter's career forever. Francis was crushed by a clown on a unicycle and nobody mourned him. Paddy got run over by a tank because the writers couldn't stand him. Vern and Johnny were gunned down by Stewie as a public service announcement. Diane Simmons turned out to be a murderer and fell off a cliff. Muriel Goldman was stabbed at a dinner party, and Mort has been lonely ever since. Derek Wilcox was thrown off a balcony by his wife's former co-worker. Bertram was shot with a crossbow in Renaissance Italy by his own half-brother. Horace was killed by a baseball, and the drunken clam lost its soul. Brian was hit by a car, and the world screamed until they brought him back. Thelma Griffin had a stroke, and Peter learned that grief is messy and confusing. Mayor Adam West died because the man who voiced him left this world. Angela died because Carrie Fisher left this world. Doug was killed in a plane crash because the show was done with him. Ernie the Giant Chicken was decapitated by Meg because even the longest running gags have to end eventually. Those are the dead of Quahog. They're not coming back. And Family Guy is a different show because they're gone. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. And the next time you watch an old episode of Family Guy and see a character from this list walking around in the background, alive and well, and completely unaware of what's coming for them, take a second to appreciate them. Because in Quahog, even cartoon characters don't live forever. Good night. Actually, one more thought. You know what's wild about all of this? Family Guy has now been on the air for so long that some of its dead characters have been gone for longer than they were alive on the show. Mr. Weed appeared for about 3 seasons and has been dead for 21. Francis appeared for about 5 seasons and has been dead for 19. Vern and Johnny existed for roughly 4 seasons and have been dead for 20. Diane Simmons anchored the news for 9 seasons and has been dead for 15. These characters have spent more of the show's history as memories than as active participants. They exist now primarily in reruns, in compilations like this one, and in the occasional flashback or ghost appearance that the show uses to remind viewers of who used to live in Quahog. That's actually a pretty accurate reflection of how death works in real life too. When someone dies young, they spend more years being remembered than they spent being alive. Their legacy becomes bigger than their life. And in the world of Family Guy, the dead characters have achieved a kind of permanence that the living characters never will. Peter will keep changing, keep evolving, keep doing new dumb things every week. But Mr. Weed will always be the boss who choked on a bread roll. Diane will always be the news anchor who snapped. Ernie will always be the chicken who fought Peter for 23 seasons. The dead are fixed, the living are in flux. And somehow, in a show about constant chaos and change, the fixed points are the ones that give everything else its meaning. Okay, now I'm really done. Sleep well. And if you happen to catch a Family Guy rerun tomorrow, pay attention to the background. You might spot someone who isn't around anymore. And now, you'll know exactly what happened to them, and exactly why they never came back. Good night for real this time.